Hello once again. We are back for the final movement in the symphonic suite Sheherazade by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, written in the late 1880s. And the final movement is Festival at Baghdad The Sea. So yes, again, I wonder whether Sinbad is part of this conclusion as his own movement, if you will, started it off, but either way, it suggests a celebratory or jubilant occasion in Baghdad, and of course, a reference to the sea again makes me think that the journeys and the adventures which characterize the start of this symphonic suite are perhaps being referred to again or concluded in this final movement. So let's give it a listen. This is Sheherazade, Festival at Baghdad The Sea, as performed by Philharmonia Orchestra of London and conducted by Enrique Batiz. incredible. So, yeah, like, as I said, do not recall the specifics of the 1001 Nights meta-narrative or the details of the individual sagas, but hearing that movement, it sounds at the beginning like we hear Sheherazade's theme, but it's a bit more desperate, it's almost fatigued, and my mind interpreted that as like she's now, running out of stories to tell, and she really is becoming more and more worried that she won't have another tale to prolong her stay of execution. And so I feel like the way the melody is a bit more frantic and less typically smooth and elegant is maybe a suggestion that by the time she gets to the beginning of this movement, again, she's not even sure what she's going to tell. And the fact that we hear different melodies that we've heard in the previous movements suggests to me, and again, without really knowing if this is the case, that she's drawing connections between the different stories and trying to create some grand finale, some conclusion that, again, ties up all the loose ends and uses all the power and emotion of the story she's told up until that point. And then indeed we get to most of the way through this movement, which again, it has power, and I do really think that those big brass flares are indeed the melody or the motif of the sea, and those big cymbal crashes are like waves crashing against a ship or a coastline or a port. I feel like that really is surely that part of the composition. That's what it's supposed to represent. But regardless, most of the way through we get the more pure and typical Sheherazade theme, and it's like by that point she feels like she has woven the stories together well, and she has provided a compelling, grand story at the end of this period of storytelling, and by the end we get an even fuller, richer, and more contented articulation of the Sheherazade melody. And I feel like that's her saying, that's the conclusion, and that fulfills my promise to regale you with tales, to entertain you while we're waiting to see what you're going to decide here. So it's like by the end, she's not desperate anymore, she's recovered, and now is putting a beautiful capstone on the series of stories she told. So that's the way it hit me. I think it's wonderfully performed. Some of the solo work, the violin work is incredible. Obviously there's a lot of great woodwind work. As I said, there's the tambourines and the triangles and the timpani, and then I think some rolling snare drums. So there's a lot of percussion along the course of the movements overall, and this movement specifically. So as I said, the way this one takes bits and pieces of what we've already heard and then weaves it together in a way that is both culminating and unique, I think is fantastic. So once again, praise to Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov for writing this very colorful and dramatic symphonic suite. Shout out to the Philharmonia Orchestra of London and to Enrique Baptiste for some great conduction. Let me know what you think, and we're on to the next piece now. Peace.